This is the conclusion of episode 4 of The Eagle Has Crashed, May 2029. Herm Stanbaugh drove his John Deere tractor, planting corn as he had done since he was 10. He was 59, but hard work and long days in the sun made him look much older. Stanbaugh was tough as nails, and the Gulf War veteran muttered under his breath a lot. About the only time he smiled was when folks called him an ornery son of a bitch, a bad reputation he relished. Stanbaugh saw the black sedan pull up the dirt lane, but ignored it. All that April rain's got me late getting planted, he thought. I ain't got no time for chit-chat. A man in a white Oxford with rolled-up sleeves made his way across the field. Stanbaugh ignored him until he motioned for the farmer to kill the motor. "Can't you see I'm busy?" Stanbaugh barked. "What are you planning, old-timer?" Stanbaugh studied the man for a moment. Clean-shaven, smooth skin. Definitely not a farmer. "None of your darn business," Stanbaugh replied. "My name's Darrell Ferguson, and I'm with the Ohio Department of Agriculture. What you're planting is my business." The farmer snorted. "I'm planting corn." Ferguson rubbed his forehead. "I can see that, Mr. Stanbaugh. What hybrid?" Stanbaugh sat there, stone-faced and silent. Now I know what this is about, he thought. He was planting Hawkeye seeds from a small family-owned company in Des Moines, and their seeds weren't on the state's approved list of hybrids. Only the big companies could afford the bullcrap testing to get on the list. Big Ag had bought the Republicans again. Stanbaugh rarely swore, but the old-school farm Democrat made an exception for Republicans. Fucking Republicans. The farmer hopped down from his tractor, stood before the ag agent, and stared him down. "I'll ask you again, old-timer. What are you planting?" Stanbaugh clenched his blocky jaw and glared back. Ferguson scratched his left eyebrow. "The department doesn't have any records of approved seed purchases for this acreage." Stanbaugh continued staring and stewing. Big Brother had finally come to the farm. Ferguson threw up his hands. "Listen, pal, I'm giving everyone a break this year so we can all get used to the new law. I don't have to, but I'm going to because I'm a nice guy." He pointed at Stanbaugh's face. "Now answer my question." Nice guy, Stanbaugh thought. This guy's a friggin' a-hole. Finally, Stanbaugh relented. "I can't make it if I have to pay Big Ag's seed prices. Hawkeyes are much more affordable. Better, too." "Then tell them to get into the Healthy Growers program and get their seeds tested." "Costs millions. Said they can't afford it." Ferguson scanned the acreage. "Did you know I'm supposed to make you pick up all that unapproved seed you just put down?" Stanbaugh's eyes flared, and he stepped nose to nose with the agent. "You wouldn't dare." "Don't test me." Stanbaugh shoved him in the chest, knocking Ferguson to the soft soil. The agent scrambled to his feet and pulled a small handheld device out of his back pocket. He typed at it furiously with his thumbs. "You just got yourself a big fat fine, Stanbaugh." The device spit out a small slip of paper, and Ferguson held it out to the farmer. Stanbaugh slapped it away, and it fluttered to the ground. The men locked stares. "If that fine goes unpaid, it turns into jail time, which is something you probably deserve for assaulting an ag agent." Stanbaugh stared back. "Think carefully before you do anything else rash," Ferguson said, before heading back to his car. The farmer stood and fumed. "God, I miss the good old days." Federal Reserve Chairwoman Sullivan stomped past two Secret Service agents and into the Oval Office. The president was behind his desk in his chair, with Treasury Secretary Waters leaning against the front of the desk and Chief of Staff Pirelli off to his side. "What the hell do you guys think you're doing?" Sullivan barked, making her gray bun bounce. Chief of Staff Pirelli blocked her path. "I've had enough of you, Sullivan. Get out of my way, Pirelli. I grew up with two brothers who were hockey players. I know how to handle goons like you." She pushed him aside and resumed her march, stopping before the president's desk. "What the hell do you guys think you're doing?" President Maynard held up his hands. "Calm down." The chairwoman scanned the eyes of Maynard and Waters and then pointed her finger at the president. I've studied many countries that have run into fiscal troubles, and I'll admit that what you've done isn't as crazy as a lot of other schemes, but this is the United States, not Greece or Argentina or Zimbabwe. She looked at Treasury Secretary Waters, who leaned against the president's desk with his arms crossed. Sullivan shook her head in disgust. Ben, how could you agree to falsify revenue numbers? Do you have any idea what international creditors will do if they figure out your game? He stared her down with his steely green eyes. You left us no choice, Andrea. The unexpectedly poor economic numbers have left us low on operating capital, and you tied our hands. We cannot make the necessary budget changes quickly enough, and you insist on denying our dire need to sell more treasuries. We had to make things look a little better to keep creditors calm. The bottom line is that you have to let us finance more debt. You have had years to fix the deficit problem, so don't complain you're in a time crunch, Ben. Sullivan turned to the president. Mr. President, while every government default over the past century has had its quirks, there are also many similarities. What you are asking me to do is play a broken record, and we all know how the tune goes. It's an old country tune, and everyone ends up broken-hearted and crying in their beer. I am trying something different, namely, restraint by a nation's central bank. Instead of shifting the problem onto our domestic and foreign creditors, I am saying that we, as the federal government of the United States, need to fix the problem. I will not let you issue more debt than we agreed upon. I will not print a pile of money to monetize the debt, and I will not let you default. She scanned the team once more. Fix your deficit problem, Mr. President. Pirelli stepped out in front of Sullivan. Get off your high horse, he said, towering above her with his arms crossed. You put us in a bind by stopping us from selling more treasuries to get us through a short, rough patch. If we had made emergency cuts, it would have sent a message of panic. I mean, seriously, what were we going to do? Auction off Yellowstone? He threw up his hands. That would have kept creditors calm. He pointed at the chairwoman. And let me tell you another thing. This is minor compared to a lot of the games that have gone on over the years. Like the covert operation President McDowell and Republicans launched to topple Uruguay's government 10 years ago. Do you think a dime of that shows up anywhere on the budget books? He crossed his arms again. And speaking of cover-ups, how about we open up the Federal Reserve books and see what we can find in there? $1 trillion for a bailout here, another $1 trillion there, none of which anyone knows about. I bet it'd make what we did look like child's plays. Sullivan scowled and exhaled noisily through her nose. The Federal Reserve's books are confidential to maintain its independence. And its lack of accountability, Pirelli huffed. Although what Pirelli said is true, Miss Chairwoman, I want to get back to the point, President Maynard said. You make quick deficit reductions sound so easy, but this is Washington politics we're dealing with. Nothing is easy here. You're a genius of a politician, Mr. President, she said with a shrug. I think you're up to the challenge. The president turned to the Treasury Secretary. Ben, give the chairwoman a copy of your fiscal austerity proposals. Waters walked to the Fed chief and handed her a several hundred-page document, but did not immediately release it from his grasp. And don't forget, he said, I'm opposed to the fact that you are restricting our capacity to run appropriate deficits to fill in the slack for declining business and consumer spending. It's a recipe for disaster, as I taught you as a freshman back in Michigan. He released the document. Sullivan nodded as she tucked the pages under her arm. Your opinion is duly noted and disagreed with. I will give these a close read and have my staff economists give you a confidential opinion of which proposals we think work best and why. That would be greatly appreciated, the president answered with a nod. But at this point, do anything you can, Sullivan turned and glared at the Treasury Secretary. Except continuing to falsify revenue numbers. She put a right hand on her forehead. I can't believe you did that. It will be all right, Andrea, Waters reassured. Folks at the IMF and other credit agencies always miss this kind of stuff. Sullivan glared back at him once more. It's true that they've often missed danger signs in the past, but it was a reckless gamble to assume that they will this time. If anyone, and I do mean anyone, figures this out, we are in deep, deep trouble. Sullivan turned and headed for the door before facing the president and his economic team once more. You know where I stand, Mr. President. Fix the deficit problem. Now. An hour later, the president sat at his desk with his head buried in his hands, his fingertips scratching his forehead. He heard his office door open and shifted his chin to his palms. A Secret Service officer poked his head through the door. "Miss Anderson here to see you, Mr. President." The president smiled softly and exhaled. "Send her in." The officer nodded and opened the door further. He held his left arm out, and a woman whisked by. She was tall, fit, and wore a dangerously short business skirt. She looked back over her shoulder, sending her long locks spilling over her coat. "Thank you as always, Danny." The officer nodded with a guilty grin and closed the Oval Office door. The woman turned to the president, who had propped his feet up on the desk and put his hands behind his head. "Boy, am I glad to see you, Eve," he said, slowly shaking his head and peering over the shadowy bags under his eyes. Like many freshman congressmen who arrive in the Capitol without their wives, Amy had remained in Hartford to tend to her law practice. Maynard had started with call girls. He moved on to slinky Georgetown bar girls, and by the time he was a senator, he was entertained by some of Washington's highest-class debutantes. After Amy had moved to Washington to serve as First Lady, Maynard didn't see the point of kicking the habit. After all, he had a high-stress, low-paying job. He deserved at least one little fringe benefit. Anderson tilted her head to the side, sending her long blonde hair tumbling over the front of her shoulder, and began stepping around the desk with a pronounced stride that pumped her hips up and down like pistons. "Have you had a bad day, Mr. President?" His chest heaved, and he exhaled with a gust. "A very bad day, Eve. A very, very bad day." She floated behind his chair and began kneading his shoulders. Blowing into his ear, her rosy lips tickled him gently. "Would you like me to make your day better?" Eve kept her right hand on his back and swung around the chair. She tossed her left leg over the president and straddled him as she moved her hands to the side of his head. Leaning forward, she began to nibble on his stubbly neck. Her skirt had risen to her waist, and she began to swivel her hips, grinding her crotch against his. Her left hand moved to his shirt, loosened his tie, and undid the top button. As her hands worked their way down his shirt, her nibbling mouth followed closely behind. At his belly, she looked up with a naughty grin. "Is your day getting better, Mr. President?" Maynard smiled and put his hands behind his head. "Oh, yeah." And so concludes May of 2029 of The Eagle Has Crashed. If you like what you're hearing and would like to purchase a copy, paper copies can be purchased at clearpeakpress.com, barnesandnoble.com, as well as amazon.com. Ebooks can be purchased at Amazon, Barnes & Noble, Smashwords, the Sony Store, the iTunes Store, and other retailers. We'll be back on Sunday with June of 2029 of The Eagle Has Crashed, and have a great rest of the week.